I'm Christiane Amanpour at the CNN headquarters in Atlanta. Remember President Reagan's evil empire, the Soviet Union? Well, it's consigned to history for now, due in no small part to the defeat of the Red Army on the battlefields of Afghanistan. During the 1980s, 1.5 million Afghans died to push the Soviets out. They did it with billions of dollars worth of U.S. military aid. Since then, as we know, one superpower has collapsed. The other has packed up and gone home, but the killing continues as a new civil war set in. At one point, the fighting got so bad a few years ago that the UN and all relief agencies except the Red Cross pulled out. They are trickling back now, but only with skeleton staffs. After helping along the fall of communism, the Afghans now say they feel betrayed and abandoned. Together with photographer David Rust and videotape editor Mark Phillips, we looked inside one of the world's forgotten wars. It's called bozkeshi, calf pulling. It's Afghanistan's national sport, ferocious and wildly popular. Competing teams fight over the animal, sometimes ripping it to shreds. Swap the calf for Afghanistan and the horseman for her many warring factions, and you get a pretty good picture of what is happening to this country today. 7 years after sending the Soviets packing, Afghanistan is still at war, this time with herself.
Brother killing brother. Yeah, fighting. Without nothing, I don't know what's happened.
A taxi driver tries to explain, but little prepares you for this futility. Vast stretches of the capital Kabul lie in ruins, destroyed not during the 10-year Soviet occupation, but afterwards, when victorious Islamic fighters known as Mujahideen turned on each other in a battle for power. Civilians trying to get off the carousel of death move once, twice, too many times, but they cannot escape. Our lives are completely ruined, says this mother. We've moved 3 times in 3 years because our homes were attacked. In 1994 alone, 10,000 residents of Kabul were killed, 25,000 were wounded, and 1 million fled the capital, exceeding even the pain Serbs inflicted on Sarajevo in 4 years. But pity the victims of a war that has fallen off the trendometer. The spotlight was blinding in the 80s when the Soviets rolled in and made this the last Cold War battleground. Then the United States poured in billions of dollars to fight them through Mujahideen guerrillas. But when the communists left, the US rolled up its Afghan maps, and now the dying goes on in the dark.
We have unfinished business here. I think we didn't stay long enough to see these people through the critical period. I think the critical period continued after the Soviets left.
The United Nations, Red Cross, and a host of other relief agencies are the only ones trying to see the people through. The Kabul government has little authority beyond keeping other factions at bay. Each claims to be more Muslim than the next, a distinction lost on the people who see the holy warriors riding around in expensive cars and getting their pickups hosed down, while they live in slums with no running water and even less say over whether they live or die.
I want to tell them to stop the war, and they kill their brothers, they fight with each other. It's not a good way.
That kind of despair is slowly sapping Kabul's strength. The government says the US has a moral duty to re-engage, but its embassy remains firmly shut. US involvement amounts to backing a defunct UN peace mission. The UN has been trying without success for the last 2 years to get the warring factions to form a national authority just to kick off the political process. But increasingly, many fear nothing will change unless the major powers weigh in on the side of peace. In the meantime, the war is being aggravated as more and more neighboring countries become involved. Iran, Russia, India, and Pakistan are said to be minding their own interests by supplying various sides while working on a negotiated settlement. Observers believe no side can win a clear military victory, so casual killing fills the stalemate. The future lies with a generation of Kalashnikov-toting illiterates, and the world has one more wasteland whose people were good enough to fight its war, but not worth the effort for peace. There are many grisly reminders of the price Afghanistan paid to fight communism. At this memorial in the western city of Herat, Bones and skulls, many pierced by bullet holes, belong to Afghans killed in anti-communist uprisings of the late 1970s. Today, Herat is ruled by the Islamic fundamentalist group known as the Taliban. It refuses to negotiate with the Kabul government, vowing only total military victory. At a checkpoint in the ancient city of Herat, soldiers of the Taliban militia hasten to show off their weapons. Smiling and posing for visiting journalists, they look like a bunch of children eager to please. Last September, they rolled into Herat, capping a sweep to take control of half Afghanistan. But behind their friendly checkpoint manners lies a fierce Islamic ideology. We're against these things. It's music. We broke the tapes, he says. The Taliban take cassettes from passing cars and string up the entrails. They've machine-gunned the heads of horses that form the centerpiece of a fountain, defaced public paintings, and declared television un-Islamic. Rooftops that once sprouted antennas are now bare. The Quran says there mustn't be radio or television, and women must not come to the bazaar alone, he insists. Well, not quite. Indeed, the rank and file appears to be mostly illiterate, but they're enforcing their version of the Quran with the Kalashnikov. Despite the edict against women and television, Herat's deputy governor agreed to be interviewed, provided we didn't show any part of his body.
We're trying to form the same government the Prophet Muhammad established 1400 years ago, and we will do it. The Holy Quran says, whenever you catch a thief, cut off his hand and execute a murderer. It's God's order.
The Taliban has ordered women to stop working. The only exception is in hospitals and Herat's Red Cross Orthopedic Center, where women are still employed to make and fit prostheses. Wounded Taliban fighters are the biggest beneficiaries. But closing down girls' schools has been the Taliban's biggest blow. Education is just for boys, they say. But now, boys don't get taught either because most of the teachers are women. So classrooms full of idle children wait to take turns with one of the few male teachers. We're not learning anything, says 15-year-old Gorban, so we'll end up stupid and ignorant. In a daring act of defiance, female teachers and students take to the streets to demand a return to class. Taliban officials admit they'll have to find some way out of this dilemma. Most people consider Iran to be the epitome of Islamic fundamentalism, but the Taliban scoff at the Ayatollahs, saying they have failed to create a real Muslim society. And in Tehran, a senior Iranian government official said, these guys are even more fundamentalist than we are. Iran backs the Kabul government, which in turn accuses Pakistan, a U.S. ally, of backing the Taliban. The group emerged 18 months ago, vowing to bring order to the chaos of Afghanistan's civil war. But soon, the Taliban joined the mayhem, raining rockets on Kabul's residents in an attempt to take the capital. Government forces held them off.
The opposition knows it cannot invade or occupy Kabul, and that prepares the way for negotiations between all sides.
Observers say there'll be no chance of peace unless outside powers stop arming rival sides. Western diplomats say support for the increasingly independent and unpopular Taliban seems to be slipping. Still, the endless power struggle keeps Afghanistan slouching towards the abyss. The Kabul government reports fierce artillery exchanges continue, with dead piling up on both sides. But when we come back, the hidden killers strewn all over Afghanistan, mines. Even if the war ended, people will keep dying for decades. 100 million mines are scattered all over the world, in most cases with little or no record of where they are. They are used by belligerents in war, but they kill mostly civilians, and for years after a war has ended. And now there's a growing international campaign to ban them. Recently, a group of retired U.S. generals and admirals wrote asking President Clinton to join the campaign, and the U.S. is now weighing its position on this deadly matter. This is the face of war and peace. Infants, teenagers, adults, wounded by weapons that keep firing long after a conflict is over.
We closed this stump
In 1 month, surgeons at one hospital in the Afghan capital Kabul amputated 35 limbs. Landmines caused almost all the injuries. Almost all the injured are civilians. The International Committee of the Red Cross runs the city's only rehabilitation center.
There is no pressure here, no pressure there.
Alberto Cairo has been fitting mine victims here for the past 6 years. The false leg business is not about to go bust.
It's pure terrorism. You know perfectly when you put a mine that the mine will hit someone innocent, someone that is not a soldier, someone that you are not fighting against.
The fight against mines is being waged in the capital and the countryside. Teams of sniffer dogs and 3,000 workers hired and trained by the United Nations search and destroy. Scraping through the soil inch by inch, it's taken 3 days just to find one mine here. It is difficult, slow, and very scary work. I must do it for my country, says Shapur Khan. 17 years of war, first against the Soviets and now against each other, have turned his country into one of the world's biggest minefields. 22 square kilometers in the capital alone. Only a fraction has been cleared. Work will last into the next century if the funding does. A mine costs $3 to make, $1,000 to remove. In the meantime,
we cannot start our schools, our university. The people, they cannot work, the farmers even, they cannot go to their land.
in addition to mines, tons of unexploded weapons help cripple economies, ruin farmland, and prevent refugees from returning home. Here, a 120mm mortar shell in someone's garden. The alarm is sounded. And this goes on day after day, week after week. And now the Red Cross has called for a total global ban on landmines. Since mines have caused several casualties amongst U.S. soldiers serving in Bosnia, the U.S. military has started to consider whether or not to join the growing anti-mine campaign. And advocates hope that will have a knock-on effect. However, there is still resistance from the many countries that make, sell, and stockpile mines. In the meantime, the UN, Red Cross, and other relief agencies are trying to protect the innocent by teaching them how to recognize and avoid mines. Because they kill about 10,000 people every year and maim many more. Because civilians, not soldiers, are the principal victims. A 13-year-old girl loses her leg collecting firewood. In societies like hers, a woman who's maimed is not marriage material. I was just farming my land. How did I know there were mines, says 16-year-old Popal, the family's only breadwinner. This hospital receives about 10 mine-wounded a day. It is bracing for double that number now that spring has come, snows are melting, and farmers are going out to plant again. Despite the constant threat from mines scattered all over the country, much of Afghanistan is at peace. Farmers, goat herds, and other ordinary people just trying to get on with their lives. But for the capital, it's different. Kabul is the center of a fierce power struggle between the Taliban and the government, and that's created a desperate humanitarian crisis. A splash of color brightens Kabul's squalor. Spring has come, but it has brought another season of war. At the mental hospital, a mother finally goes out of her mind, worrying that her 12-year-old son will be drafted to the front. And those who return, what horrors do they recall? There are no psychiatrists at this institution. Kabul's health and social services have broken down. Almost all Afghanistan's professionals left during 17 years of war. The Kabul authorities have left most of the relief efforts to the UN and other international organizations. The UN, for instance, though, has only received about a quarter of its latest cash appeal. And that goes to meeting the most basic humanitarian needs. Nothing can be spent on development or construction, and without that, there can be no hope of any lasting political stability. Officials say donors are not so taken by a drama that plays out in the dark.
We just keep contacting our office and screaming emergency, and we get, but we are really just a drop in the bucket for what the needs are here.
Aid is divided between the needy and the desperate, like Kabul's hungry kids, more and more coming to hospitals that can't help them. At UN-run neighborhood clinics, mothers come to check the progress of malnutrition. 80% of all children and adults are underfed. It's too expensive to eat properly, so I can't make milk, she says. Indeed, only 15% of the people can afford the soaring food prices. Poverty that used to hide in pockets is now spreading through the city. Orphanages are full of children whose parents are not all dead. Many have simply been abandoned by parents who can't look after them. The long war has killed nearly 500,000 children, according to the UN. It has turned a quarter of all Afghan women into widows. Not enough to eat, they complain, even though special programs cater to these, the most vulnerable.
We have been trying to favor the poorest place of the city, the heaviest bombarded place of the city, like, for example, this place.
Frederic Roussel of the ACTED Relief Agency admits they can barely feed every mouth. More than 1 million Afghans died helping the US fight back the Soviets and hastening the collapse of communism. Today they ask that their sacrifice be remembered.
To generate interest again is very difficult because they've already wanted to forget this. But when you look into the faces of the people here and the victims here, you can't forget this.
But America gives little, and Russia, which helped destroy Afghanistan, gives nothing but military aid, which keeps the civil war going. The madness is not lost on anyone here. We know we're ruining our country, that it's gone back 100 years. We have enough brains to understand that, he says, but it's foreign interference that keeps us fighting. Afghanistan may have lost its strategic importance, but not its legendary pride. Instead of relying on handouts, many joined the aid agency's labor-intensive programs, digging drainage ditches, building flood walls, and improving living conditions in return for food. Perhaps it is hard to imagine, but from the depths of their deprivation, Afghans dig up a wealth of dignity, kindness, and warmth, gems to remind you of the great civilization they once had. Not so long ago, an American writer described the celebrated beauty of Kabul's women, described a city that bustled with tourists, theaters, restaurants, and universities, a city that stood tall, handsome, happy, and proud. It'll be a long time before Afghanistan regains her lost pride. In the meantime, she is the center of a power play between neighboring countries with their own national interests at heart. When we come back, we'll see who's picking up the pieces now that the superpowers are no longer interested. For 10 years, Afghanistan was the center of the Cold War world. What happened there, the outcome, was considered vital for Western security interests. No longer. Joining me now from New York, Professor Barnett Rubin of the Council on Foreign Relations, and recently returned from Afghanistan. Professor Rubin, many people might be asking, why does Afghanistan matter? Does stability there matter?
Of course, it doesn't have the strategic importance it had during the Cold War, when our main concern was whether the Soviet Union would occupy it. But it still matters in a number of important ways. First of all, the constant fighting and the flow of weapons and drugs from Afghanistan destabilizes the surrounding area, which includes South Asia, where there are two nations with the capacity to build nuclear weapons, and the former Soviet Union to its north, where, of course, we are concerned about the heritage of the Soviet Union and its effect on Russia, as well as the Middle East to the west of Afghanistan, where it borders on Iran. It also has become the world's second largest producer of opium, and the drugs from Afghanistan are definitely having an effect both on the surrounding countries and also on Europe.
Is there a group, either the Kabul government or the Taliban, who would be better for Western interests, if you like? Who would be the best people to be in power, if one can make that kind of a judgment?
The overriding interest for Western governments, and I think as well for the states in the region, is for some government to emerge that could stabilize the country. We might have some marginal preference for the current government because it has some more educated people than the leadership of the Taliban, but in my opinion, that's not a major consideration. Any government that came to power would have to reintegrate some of those educated people. The problem now is that neither the current government nor the Taliban has shown the political or military capability to unify the country and provide the kind of stability that would be in the interest of virtually everyone outside of Afghanistan, and especially, of course, of the people inside Afghanistan.
Professor Rubin, thank you very much. I'm afraid we have to leave it right there. Recently, a Western diplomat in the region said to me that Afghanistan is, quote, a giant mess that shows no signs of getting fixed anytime soon. For weeks now, the Kabul government and its main rivals, the Taliban, have each vowed to launch the decisive military offensive. It hasn't happened, and even if it did, no one's quite sure exactly what difference it would make. Real peace, say the experts, won't come.